What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So a lot of you have been requesting this video. It is called The Fallen of World War II because you guys have seen our first video on the World War II. And before we get into the video, guys,
smash that subscribe button.
Make sure you subscribe because we are climbing to 100k and we are going to keep reacting to your recommendations as long as you subscribe, guys.
And if you don't, I will haunt you in your dreams like Freddy Krueger.
There we go. In fact, it's going to haunt you guys. Don't make it happen. You don't want that. Trust me.
And I won't look like this.
The average lifespan of an American is 80 years. And an 80-year-old today was 10 when World War II ended, 4 when it began. A soldier who saw battle would have to be in his late 80s, at least today. Generals, political leaders, the decision makers of the war, few are still with us. And over the past few decades, we've seen authors and filmmakers rush to capture stories from survivors before this connection of memory is lost.
It's going to be a good video, I could tell.
This project is not about individual war stories, and it's not about survivors. We're going to tally up the tens of millions of people whose lives were cut short by the war, and see how these numbers stack up to other wars in history, including trends in recent conflicts. We'll be counting soldiers and civilians separately. Each of these figures represents 1,000 people who died.
Damn.
Civilians were of all walks of life, whereas military deaths were almost entirely men. The average age was about 23.
Oh my God, dying young.
In most battles, for every 1,000 soldiers killed, there are more than 1,000 who were injured. The word casualty can be confusing because in military speak, it often includes both deaths and injuries, and anything else that takes a soldier out of service. Here, we're just counting the deaths, and we'll begin with American soldiers.
My God, how much is it?
Over 400,000 died.
400,000 soldiers. That's obviously I knew the scale of World War II, but I didn't, like, when you look at the statistics, you know, individually, it really hits hard and makes you really realize how bad it was. But did that shock you? 400,000.
Most of the deaths occurred in the European theater, fighting the Nazis. And about a quarter were in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese. When you put them on the timeline, you see that casualties were the heaviest at the end of the war. The war began on September 1st, 1939. But the US wasn't willing to join the fight until Pearl Harbor, 2 years in. The deaths increased drastically on D-Day, when the Allies invaded Normandy. One of the most tragic moments of the war was on D-Day at Omaha Beach, where 2,500 Americans fell.
Wow, that's so sad, man.
So about the same number of US soldiers died on this single beach landing as the entire 13 years of the recent war in Afghanistan. The bloodiest battle in the Pacific was Okinawa, which lasted 82 days, during which 12,500 Americans died.
82 days non-stop battles. The fact that you can even battle for that long, like consistently, is wild.
I think it's sad how the government doesn't really take care of the soldiers to such a great extent after.
Yeah, because there's a lot of, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, there's a lot of like homeless veterans and stuff like that. And I think that's quite a problem in the US, if I'm not mistaken.
This country as well.
This country as well, I believe there's a lot of like ex-vets that are just like, they're not looked after to the level they should, especially when they put their life on the line for their country.
To get the whole world where we are today.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah,
like,
sad.
About 5,000 of these deaths were at sea from kamikaze attacks.
Oh God, suicide.
Now let's look at some other countries, starting with Europe. Germany started World War II when it invaded Poland. Poland ultimately lost 200,000 soldiers in the war.
Wow.
Most died after the invasion while the country was occupied by Germany and the Soviet Union. Germany, meanwhile, lost just 16,000 in the invasion.
In comparison, that's
The Nazis
nothing.
went on to invade and conquer other countries, including Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Greece,
Except France as well.
Yugoslavia. France surrendered, but after losing 92,000 soldiers in the Battle of France. Over 200,000 ultimately fell, which includes deaths in POW camps, French colonies, and other fighting. Yugoslavia suffered almost 500,000 military deaths. The initial invasion brought relatively few casualties on both sides. But the deaths mounted under Nazi occupation due to guerrilla fighting, civil conflict, and mass executions. The Nazi invasions were swift, with relatively few German losses. Even the Nazi commanders expressed surprise at their success.
Obviously, it's very bad in what has happened, but on a military standpoint, that's a high success rate for them. Look how many successful invasions they've done, and they've only lost that much in comparison to the other countries they invaded, which is really sad.
I wonder why they didn't lose that many. Is it because
strategy and probably catching people by surprise? I reckon
most probably.
They pre-planned it, innit?
Yeah.
Like they obviously knew what they were gonna do.
And then we have the United Kingdom and the United States, who were not invaded but took the fight to the Nazis.
Had to.
Britain lost about the same number of soldiers as the US, which includes the British colonies. Germany lost about 500,000 soldiers fighting the US and Britain in what is known as the Western Front, which took place in France and Belgium. But most Nazi soldiers died in the Eastern Front, Germany's unsuccessful invasion of the Soviet Union. The numbers are staggering.
Oh my God.
The most famous battle of the Eastern Front, and perhaps the turning point of the European war, was Stalingrad. The German Sixth Army successfully took Stalingrad, but then got surrounded by the Soviets and cut off from food and ammunition. 500,000 Nazis would ultimately die in Stalingrad.
Wow.
Another 100,000 were taken prisoner, of which 6,000 would ever return. POWs had a low survival rate throughout World War II, and it was particularly grim in the East. When you include these POWs, roughly the same number of Germans died in Stalingrad as all the Western Front fighting against France, the UK, and the US. And though Stalingrad was a victory for the Soviets, they suffered almost twice as many losses as Germany.
Insane.
The Soviet Union would eventually defeat the once unstoppable German army, killing 2.3 million Nazi soldiers.
So 2.3 Nazi soldiers died. That's a lot of people, man.
You know what? I'm not going to lie. I didn't expect this many people.
Same.
Right, in a country we're at war.
Yeah.
When they gave the stats of the 400,000 passed away,
I was shocked at that.
it made me realize, whoa, how many people actually went to war? I didn't think it was to that scale.
Same.
It's crazy.
Yeah, because and when you put, he's putting these little people who count as 1,000 each person or 1,000 soldiers, like this makes you realize the context of what he's saying. It's not just a number, it is real people. It's just crazy. Like it baffles me to even see.
But winning the war came at a cost.
Big cost. So many lives. So many families destroyed, imagine.
Oh.
My God. What the hell? Still going.
8.7 million is the official tally by the Russian military, a hotly disputed number.
And that's the ones they know about. I'm sure there's deaths that didn't make it. So it's probably more than that. It's got to be more than that. What do you reckon, guys? In the comment section below. That's wild.
No, I'm sure, because they're going to know what soldiers are not coming back, right?
True, maybe.
It's all in the paperwork and everything.
Yeah, they've got to
This
know.
must be accurate.
Comment below, guys, if this is like really accurate or if it's a little bit off.
Yeah.
Comment below.
Some studies have calculated as many as 14 million dead.
Oh my gosh.
To complete the count of European military deaths, we need to add German deaths from other fronts, including the North and Africa, as well as deaths from other Axis powers allied with the Nazis, Hungary, Romania, and Italy. When you put these European military deaths on the timeline, it looks like this. You can now interact with the chart to learn more. Pause the narration if you would like more time.
No, just looking at it, you could just... It's crazy, man.
And now we switch to civilian deaths in Europe.
Civilians now.
Six million Jewish people were killed in the Holocaust.
It's a lot.
If you separate this by country, you see that about half, 2.7 million, were Polish. 700,000 were Soviets, followed by Hungary and 17 other countries. Broken down another way, about half of the 6 million were killed in the concentration camps. Over 1 million died in Auschwitz. Most were killed in the gas chambers. Others died from starvation, exhaustion, disease, and other forms of execution.
Did you ever watch the film called, it's called Boy in the Striped Pajamas?
Is it to do... I saw one about the Holocaust, but I don't know if it's that one.
Yeah, it's to do with the gas chambers.
Yeah, I think it...
Did you guys watch it as well? That is a sad film.
If it's the same film I watched, then yeah, it's really sad.
I think I'm going to rewatch it again.
Yeah.
It's just so sad.
It's hurtful, man.
The second most deadly camp was Treblinka, which was exclusively an extermination camp, set up to look like a train station.
Extermination camp, that's wild.
Mobile killing groups killed 1.4 million Jews. Like with the gas chambers, men were killed first to reduce the risk of revolt. The Holocaust also includes non-Jewish deaths. Between 130,000 to 500,000 Roma, then called Gypsies, were killed. The numbers are disputed. About 250,000 people with disabilities were killed. Homosexuals, Catholics, and other groups were also exterminated, but their numbers were relatively small. Some historians say that other civilian deaths should go under the label of Holocaust. About 2 million non-Jewish Poles were killed under German occupation, some of which were sent to the gas chambers at Auschwitz. When you combine civilian and military deaths, over 16% of the total Polish population died in World War II, which is the highest percentage of any country. But not the highest in total death count. The Soviet Union again tops that list, losing at least as many civilians as it did soldiers, somewhere between 10 and 20 million. A particularly dark moment for the Soviet Union was the siege of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. German forces surrounded Leningrad before civilians could be evacuated. Supplies, including food, were cut off for 2.5 years. 1.5 million people died as a result, mostly from starvation, mostly civilians.
That's so evil to knowingly cut off like water supplies and food supplies just like that and letting people just starve to death. How do you even have that on your conscience?
I think that's such a disgusting... Yeah. What made him wake up one day and think, I want to run the world and like... Who did he think he was?
I think he thought Jewish people were a threat. And that's what it started.
The whole world as well, though. He went, the world war was because of him.
Yeah,
he wanted to take over the whole world. Wow. I really hope he must be in hell, man.
Guys, we're going to react to oversimplified World War II Part 1 during this week's content. So subscribe to make sure you see that because we're learning about the war more deeply now.
Stalin's cruelty towards his own people is partly responsible for these numbers. He often didn't allow civilians to evacuate from cities, thinking it would cause the soldiers protecting them to fight harder. About 1 million Soviets died in Stalin's own labor camps, called the Gulag.
Bad decision, innit?
Just about every country suffered civilian losses, especially countries who were invaded. While many died as a result of so-called collateral damage, the biggest numbers occurred when it was no accident. Civilians were exterminated, purposely fired upon or bombed, used as human shields, or intentionally deprived of food. the intentional killing of civilians was done by most warring parties, including the United Kingdom and the United States. The United Kingdom was spared of a land invasion, but still lost 60,000 civilians, largely from German air raids or blitzes, often directed at civilian population centers. The UK did the same to German cities at a much greater magnitude, causing about 10 times the number of deaths. But most German civilian deaths came from the ground at the late stage of the war. When the Nazi regime collapsed, civilians living in occupied regions had to desperately flee from the advancing Soviet army. Rapes were widespread, and death estimates ranged from 600,000 to 3 million.
You know what I will add as well? I've said this in previous videos, you guys can quote me on this, and I said, I understand why, the US put so much into their military, because the second other countries like Russia or China catch up, they might try something and try to take power, and with that create wars. This is why they put, $1 trillion a year into their military, to avoid a world war like this happening, where all these people and soldiers are dying. They're literally policing the world, because all it takes is someone like Hitler to stand up in the new gen, who has a voice and has power, and in that country, if they can compete with the US and they're confident they'll win, they can try this again. That's all it takes, is one big voice.
Let's step back and see where we are with the totals.
Insane.
We just counted about 20 million civilian deaths in Europe.
That's messed up, man.
If you add this to the European military deaths we already covered, it brings us to over 40 million.
Oh my God.
Then we have the Asian theater. Here we see the vast majority of military deaths in Asia came from China and Japan. On the civilian side, about 6 million deaths from China, Indonesia, Korea, Indochina, and the Philippines can be attributed to Japanese war crimes, which are sometimes compared to the Nazi atrocities due to the sheer scale of the cruelty. China had the second highest death count after the Soviet Union.
Damn.
And like the Soviets, the Chinese government demonstrated a stunning willingness to sacrifice its own people. Chinese nationalists opened the dike at the Yellow River, hoping the flood would halt the Japanese advance. 500,000 Chinese civilians or more were killed, which is 2 or 3 times the number who died in all countries in the 2004 Asian tsunamis. But the invasion of China only cost Japan 200,000 soldiers. Most were killed fighting the US and allies in the Pacific War. A significant portion of Japanese civilian deaths were caused by American firebombing and the 2 nuclear attacks. Contrary to official US statements, these airstrikes were directed at civilian populations, not military targets. When you add all the deaths outside Europe, it brings us to a grand total of 70 million for the war, give or take depending on who's counting. And what's
Think about how valuable your own life is to you, like one life. 70 million is crazy work.
Soldiers, civilians.
And a lot of these people died because, like they said with the Asia deaths, like China was basically willing to kill their own people to try minimize certain things from the sounds of it. But it's easier said than, like, when someone's in an office, given that, authorization that kills 100,000 of their civilians or whatever it is, that death's on your hands.
Yeah,
man.
you don't value your people either.
Which is even worse.
How are you sacrificing your own people for whatever reason?
Crazy, man.
civilian deaths get included.
Wild.
More people died in World War II than in any other war in history. For comparison, here are 20 or so of the very worst wars and atrocities we have on record. Some of these are more of atrocities than wars, but we've seen how that distinction can get blurry. Some of these spanned across centuries. World War II had the highest body count, and it all happened in just 6 years.
More than 10 more years.
The world's population has grown significantly since the earliest atrocities on this list. If you want to compare them in terms of what percentage of the world died, we can adjust the chart to look like this. This rough approximation tells us there may have been more devastating wars before World War II, proportionally speaking. When we turn to post-war conflicts, it's hard to say anything that isn't controversial. But the data shows something quite extraordinary has been happening. In 1989, John Gaddis coined the phrase the long peace to identify the absence of conflict between the nuclear powers during the Cold War. 25 years later, the Cold War is over, and the term is still being used, although its meaning may have shifted. European countries have not fought each other, except for this 10-day war in 1956 when the Soviet Union invaded Hungary. When we look at European wars before World War II, it looks like this. They tend to be more frequent as you go back, though smaller in scale. And the largest 44 economies of the world have not battled each other since World War II.
I think World War II was a big lesson of what it can go, because it was the biggest one where so many people died, and they've not battled since. So
and how long it went for as well.
Yeah, I reckon that was like the peak where they said no more after this. No one could afford it.
Rich countries have fought poorer countries, like the US versus Iraq. But rich countries have not fought other rich countries. Such a period of peace between the so-called great powers hasn't been seen since the Roman Empire. To many, peace is too strong of a word. Wars have occurred since World War II, and they can be grouped into these 4 categories. We don't see colonial wars anymore. We've already noted that interstate wars between rich countries have not occurred at all. And here we see wars involving smaller economies have tapered off. That leaves civil wars of 2 types, with and without foreign intervention. And this is what these battle deaths look like alongside of World War II.
No.
More people died fighting in World War II than in all the wars since.
Crazy.
And again, we can't forget about world population, which has almost tripled since World War II. If we scale these numbers to show deaths in proportion to world population, showing the likelihood that a person on Earth dies in battle, the downward trend becomes even more pronounced. Now, this isn't to infer anything about why this trend is occurring. That's a discussion for another day.
And if you flip that and do it the other way around, where if the World War II had today's population, that would be triple. So that, was it 70 mil? Was it 70 million people? Would be what? 210 million based on today's numbers.
You can now interact with this chart to explore what conflicts are behind the token. Like counting the people who didn't die in wars that never happened. We give such importance to the word peace, but we don't tend to notice it when it occurs or report on it. Sometimes it takes reminding ourselves of how terrible war once was to see the peace that has been growing around us. Of course, this trend may not continue, and it's not clear how looking at these charts can help us make the right decisions to ensure that it does. But the longer the long peace grows, the more significant it becomes. So if watching the news doesn't make us feel hopeful about where things are heading, watching the numbers might.
Nice little positive way to look at it. That is wild. Thoughts?
You know what? Rest in peace to all those who fought in the war.
Yeah.
All those that lost their lives that were civilians. And also condolences to those who lost family members in the war in that whole time period. And may all of you just, get rewarded in the afterlife.
And strive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really sad to see. And like you said earlier, you don't realize the scale until you look at it.
I did not think it was to that extent. I definitely learned a lot of things in that video.
And that's why we're doing these videos, guys, to learn, because we want to educate ourselves more on certain things that we're less educated on, and history is not our strong forte, as you guys
we get taught this stuff in school.
Yeah, but I'll be real, I didn't pay attention
neither
to
did I.
No, you think I was sitting there in history class listening to the teacher? No, like in my school, no one did. That's the problem. That's why we're uneducated on these things, and that's why this will be good to learn. It's basically catching up on history that we should know. But guys, don't forget to subscribe. For now, peace out.
Bye.